The problem with this imbalance, this natural imbalance we experience as a conflict between the sexes, is that whereas females have been emancipated from paternalism so as to access power and service it directly, making them feel empowered, males have not. This shows a systemic bias and proves my positions on feminization of man, as I've described it elsewhere in the written text. Masculine sexuality is dangerous to the system, particularly to a nihilistic one, and that's why it must be inhibited and made illegal, forcing it to adopt feminine sexual tactics, or it is incarcerated. These sexual tactics must remain feminine in that they must manipulate appearance, seduce using promises, coyness. Metrosexuality becomes the new standard of masculinity. Adolescent games become an expression of boyish charms, and emotional blackmail becomes the social activism of these men. This is more important when the males in question are to be integrated within heterogeneous social constructs, in effect homogenizing them by reducing them to their lowest nature, their childlike boyishness. The practice of controlling and feminizing males involves a disconnection from nature, their own sexuality, and each other. A boy is first detached from his own heritage, as this is represented by the father figure. Then he is detached from his own essence, being trained, educated to feel ashamed of being a boy, forcing him to desire to be more like the girls. Then he is detached from his fellow men, the only source for learning what it is to be a man and how to be a man. Modern ideals are distinctly nihilistic. Modern ideals as they are in the West. The emotional resentment of a female's own sexuality and her own nature is expressed by feminists as a resentment towards males and how they force them into a position of femininity simply by being males. The natural agency of masculinity is used by a female to hate her own sexuality because she fails to live up to a natural fitness standard, or she has faced some traumatic event because of her feminine nature. With the MRAs, the men's rights activists, no matter what other name they go by, the feeling of shame at their own sexual insecurity becomes a redirected desire to remain childlike. The feeling of embarrassment at this intuited yet often denied sense of shame is projected upon the ones who remind them of it, accusing them of this motive, of trying to make them feel ashamed, that is. The other makes them feel embarrassed, ashamed, and so the MRA accuses the other of that secret motive without actually responding to the arguments. The accusation itself is a redirection, a way of escaping the need to offer an answer. For feminists, simply accusing another of misogyny suffices, and she does not have to respond to anything which is unflattering or which exposes her own idealistic self-flattering as a social fable, dependent on communal lies. For a feminist, rape is the worst thing you can do to a woman. For an MRA, it is taking his hard-earned money. In both cases, the individual's sense of self-worth, as this is established socially, is in question. Here we see the agreement upon the natural risks and costs of being female and male used as a defensive assault upon anyone who forces this price for womanhood and manhood upon them. The MRAs came into the forefront of internet consciousness with guns blazing about male disposability, as if this was a new thing or something women invented out of thin air. Feminists came into the scene, burning with their bras and with remarks about inequality and how females were vulnerable to masculine power, as if this was new, or that men were to blame for this. In both cases, the opposite sex was used as a scapegoat, a representation of a natural phenomenon which the other simply exemplified by being what nature made him or her to be. In both cases, the other sex was supposed to make amends for their own nature, for nature itself, by repressing or correcting it in accordance with modern cultural social ideals, or some feminine-based feeling and emotion. We must consider the other's feelings, you see, before we defeat them in a sporting event or any competition, and we must never take advantage of our own inherited superiority because the other may feel bad afterwards. In the marketplace, those who defend freedom then complain about being tricked by clever hucksters, tricked out and exploited. The hucksters who exploit their simplicity. They don't blame their own naive presuppositions, but the other for taking advantage of the very freedom which they then defend. So freedom must always adhere to a moral standard, and the weak must always be defended, protected. In essence, what is happening is that an individual is turned on by the idea, and all he does is concentrate on the positives to himself without looking at the broader picture, and with no real understanding of himself, understanding which would help him understand the other. There's an innate ignorance of self and of human nature in general, a stunting of psychology and mental abilities. These minds are born and raised within sheltered environments, surrounded by the constructs which shelter them, and they come to believe that what is common and possible within these controlled environmental conditions is some kind of universal truism. For example, a pampered, spoiled man-child may grow up in a very artificial social environment, and he may come to believe that the behaviors he perceives all around him are natural, rather than socially produced and enforced. For him, freeing people from social conventions, liberating them from order, in other words, and allowing them to behave instinctively as they please, can only enhance the moral and civil standards he perceives as being ubiquitous. He fails to see how this morality and this civility is a result of social and cultural constraints, and that if you release the animal from them, then it will, in most cases, revert to its primal behavior, which has nothing to do with current, modern, moral, and social rules. Such a man-child, as I call these naive, stunted, in development, inferior in genetics individuals, when faced with the reality of human nature, will not blame themselves for failing to appreciate it, but the other for failing to remain true to his naive, retarded expectations. Females can express the natural gifts and their sexual advantages in today's world because they've been liberated, emancipated, but males are not allowed to show theirs unless they are a reflection of the feminine ways. This bodes well for the MRAs because in the area of male advantages they feel the most vulnerable in regards to them. They call them men that do represent the masculine, cavemen, or some such derogatory term to imply their own sophisticated nature, which only exposes how delicate and feminine they've been allowed to become. What they want is to be appreciated for being the perfect emasculated male, just as females have been trained to desire this socially. And when this fails, they accuse females for failing to appreciate them as society has trained them to do. They can't understand why females, having been socially indoctrinated and trained, say one thing while still acting in a very primal way. MRAs are confused, but when they clear their minds of all the romantic junk, they still remain steadfast in their dependence upon modern ideals to compete, or to, at the very least, live a happy life. The MRAs have now settled for living a life of quiet desperation, full of hedonistic or materialistic pleasures, but with no timeless effects. They settle for a lifetime of playing and a death that will leave no remnant of their passing. Their attitude towards time exposes their self-esteem. They do not much care for what they are or what their past made them out to be, so dying after a lifelong escape in technological artifices becomes a good enough scenario. They have so little regard for their own inheritance, their own family, their own blood, that they would rather have it disappear while they play and laugh like children. The shame they feel towards themselves is projected outwards towards anyone breaking through the defensiveness they've produced to forget and to distract themselves from it. Men used to bond with each other within alliances determined by shared blood, shared ideals, shared beliefs, and shared principles. These days, if they are not out for number one, as the system has trained them to be, divide and conquer in other words, they unite under shared excuses and nihilistic rejections of reality, shared comforting. Liberals worship the future as divine, the infinite promise of what is imminent but always not yet here, a coming world never present, always over the next ridge, always coming soon. Conservatives worship the past as divine, and most do so selectively. Conservatives are characterized by nostalgia, a forever looking back to when times were better. Liberals are characterized by eternal hope for what is to come, and despite being continuously disappointed by the real, their ideal remains unflinching in its unsubstantiated positivity. For a liberal progressive, nothing in the future is imperfect, but all imperfection lies in the past, which is continuously added to. Every failure becomes another historical example of how the past must be overcome. And although they have nothing tangible to base their often fantastic projections upon, it is always because the future, like paradise, is in the beyond that it remains unblemished by the real world. The past equals immutable, determining, inescapable. We call it nature, consciousness, experience, knowledge. We may spiritualize it and call it God. The future equals mutable, open to any suggestion, freedom from the past, from what has been determined and cannot be changed, from what is indifferent and cannot be reasoned with. Imagination liberated from what was, and in its extreme, it is also liberated from what is. Fantasy takes over, resulting in delusion and a detachment from reality. The more dissatisfied and self-hating and insecure the mind is, all the more fantastic and detached from reality the past nature, in other words, its hoped for projections become. Liberalism's atheism is this rejection of the determining, unyielding, unknowable order we call the singular, monotheistic God. Conservative simpletons tend to be theists because they want to submit to this past, which for them is absolute. As a reward for their feminine submissiveness, they imagine an escape into some state outside the space-time continuum. Liberal progressives and secular humanists do not need this outside. For them, the beyond is the forever coming, but never present future. Paradise is turning into a utopian future full of the benefits of technological innovation, and minus all the collateral negative effects. In other words, all the pollutions and the pollutants. The past must be dealt with. The future can be fabricated and projected as being whatever the mind hopes and desires it to be. The past is unyielding, uncompromising, authoritarian in its essence, unyielding in its lack of emotion, whereas the future, when the mind is freed from the sensuous, the present, the perceived, can be self-referential, void of all references to anything sensuous, anything real, anything possible, anything outside the human mind. It is totally yielding to preference, to hope, to emotional appeals, because it has yet to be determined, and so it can become anything at any time. Liberals are solipsists. Their conceptions are justified by referring back to their own conceptions, or to emotions, or to fantasies. Although the future is a tumbling towards increasing randomness, in their minds this expansion of time-space is an expansion of the possible, with no decrease of the probable. All becomes possible in equal measure, reflecting the approach to the near infinite time-space of the projected near absolute chaos. The negation of order, the slow elimination of matter and energy, the uniform spread of energies, in other words, negating the possibility for life and consciousness, because both are an ordering and an increasing of probability, is imagined by them as a good thing. For the progressive, change is a good thing, because the established, the past, and the more immediate past, which they call present, is dissatisfying. The future, like God's Eden, at least promises them relief from themselves and from the world. No matter what has been determined, how the past has manifested in them, the future is always there as a hopeful correction. Hope, of course, is an antidote to fear. So anyone reminding them of what has been determined, as in how race and sexual types have been established via natural selection and historical circumstances, is a fear-monger. His motive is irrelevant, because what matters is how these minds react to what this other mind reminds them of, and what they wish to forget and deny in themselves. Therefore, if the other makes them feel afraid, or ashamed, or angry, or hateful, then fear and anger and hate and shame is his motive. He is the source of all these feelings. The feelings turn outward, just like when reality fails to live up to their expectations. It is not their misconceptions, their failings, their stupidity which is to blame, but it is always the world's fault, the other's fault, which destroys the projected, detached from reality ideals. That's how we get the feminists blaming men for being male, and MRAs blaming women for being female. The overestimation of self and the underestimation of other is made into an accusation against the other who refuses to live up to the never-in-question ideals. Communism, for example, is never at fault. It is the humans who never establish an authentic communism. It isn't Christianity which is wrong, it is the Christian who is a sinner. The ideal is always perfect, the theory always pure, and no matter how many times it fails to bring about the desirable outcomes, it is never in doubt. So the ideal, the theory, is not to be altered, but man should be changed to fit into the ideal. The world must be changed to fit into the projected future world. No, the admission that this is dependent on social engineering, eugenics, must be avoided when it contradicts the ideal's premises. Love, authenticity, purity, freedom, these are the words liberals love to use continuously. The absurdity is revealed when these liberal-minded nitwits express loathing for authoritarian systems, when what they propose as an alternative to them can only exist within man-made, highly controlled and regimented environments, and in environments where children are trained, they call it education, from birth to think and to behave in accordance with a standard, a shared standard. And they call this freedom and uniqueness, declaring man as being far too complex at the same time to be understood by applying husbandry and domestication methods. They do this as they propose to apply husbandry and domestication methods. It is easy to understand why Freud had to be debunked and dismissed as overcome, when what he said painted man as being simple and easy to be manipulated and exploited by anyone who knows what the basic ingredients of his psyche are. The masculine is about order. He is predictable, reliable, consistent, steady, unbending, stringent, because that is what order is. It's discipline. Discipline is a restriction of one's own possibilities. The feminine is about chaos, randomness, attracted to order but easily taken away by the currents of change. She's flaky, unreliable, ambivalent, unpredictably spontaneous, intuitive, instinctive, childlike in every regard. Masculinity is attracted to the chaotic because it wishes to order the disordered, incorporating it within his own. The feminine is attracted to order because she wishes to give herself to it, become a part of it, belong to it, merge and disappear within it. She wants to serve it, and with this service find value. Femininity is the emptiness, the cavity wanting to be filled with promise. She is the possible wanting to become probable, the valueless seeking value, the meaningless seeking meaning and purpose. She seeks identity through a man because she can't find it on her own. Probability is a restriction of possibility. To call something probable means that its level of possibility is higher than another. This is what ordering is a projection of this in the absolute. It becomes the singular or the absolutely probable. This means that probability, as the projection of space, is reduced to a singular possibility, which is the absolute probable. In other words, God, or the theoretical point in space-time we call the Big Bang. Of course, this is a projection, and no absolute exists or can ever exist. The absolute is, in fact, the antithesis of existence.